Hey all, welcome to day 3 of Unit 5. Today we're going to look at who some of the MVPs of the Enlightenment era are and what some of their forward-thinking ideas were. So let's just jump right on in. So if you remember at the end of the last video, I mentioned that there was a major clash of ideas between the age of absolutism and the age of enlightenment. And it's thanks to these folks, the Philosophes, okay? This is a group of intellectual, very forward-thinking men and women during the age of enlightenment who studied different things like philosophy, history, science, politics, economics, and other social issues as well. They were also looking for any other weakness in society that needed to be improved upon. So you already know that there's going to be a clash between old ways of thinking and new ways. But what do you think will be the first topic that these folks want to address? Stop and think about it for a minute. You already know the answer. I know you know this. So if you said absolutism, then you are correct, okay? There is no way that these enlightened thinkers are going to agree with this whole concept of absolutism except for this first guy, Thomas Hobbes. He was best known for his writing Leviathan, in which he wrote while he was actually exiled to Paris after Charles I, remember he was the monarch of England. He had been found guilty of treason and he was publicly executed. So Hobbes fled because of his strong royalist ideas and his support for the monarchy, which was not a very popular thing to believe at that point in time. He supported this idea of absolutism, and it didn't matter to him if it were a monarchy, an oligarchy, or a democracy. All that mattered to him was that government had unconditional power to force the people to obey. So his big belief was that humans exist in a primitive state of nature, and therefore they consent to government only for self-preservation. In other words, they only consent to be governed to look out for their own best interest, okay? So for each of these Philosophes that we're learning about today, I'm going to give you a memory trick to help you remember these folks. So here's your memory trick for Hobbes. Hobbes hated people, okay? Now, as you write that down, I want you to capitalize and underline the H in Hobbes and the H in hated, okay? So that will help you make that connection. He clearly did not believe that people were capable of governing themselves, okay? All right, so on to our next guy. This is John Locke. He lived from 1632 until 1704. He was a very educated man. He had studied medicine at Oxford University in Oxford, England. But he became interested in politics in 1672 when he was appointed to a secretarial position with the Board of Trade. He wrote 2 treatises on government in which he supported the overthrow of James II and the Glorious Revolution, which you should remember was the bloodless transfer of power to William and Mary as rulers of England. He supported a democracy, but he was okay with a constitutional monarchy. And what that is when the monarchy exists within the boundaries outlined in a written document like a constitution, okay? So that they have parameters that they can't go outside of. John Locke is often considered to be the very first philosopher. His view of how government should be is that it is an agreement or a social contract between the people and the government. His big belief was that humans are sovereign, meaning that they can rule themselves. And he agrees to the government, and that they agree to the government for protection of their natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property. Now, this is a big deal for him, this whole concept of life, liberty, and property, okay? So here is your memory trick for Locke. It is that Locke loves people. So do the same thing with Locke like you did with Hobbes. Capitalize and underline those L's in Locke and loves, okay? All right, on to our next guy. This is Baron de Montesquieu. He was a French philosopher who loved studying political liberty. His most famous book was The Spirit of Laws, in which he shared his big belief that the best form of government was one that included a separation of powers, such as 3 branches of government and a system of checks and balances. Does any of that sound familiar? If you think back to your civics classes that you had in middle school, that should sound very familiar. You should know that that's pretty much what our government is like, set up like, okay? So he is a big-time supporter of separation of powers. He felt that this would keep any one individual from having too much power and therefore abusing that power. So here's your memory trick from Montesquieu. Montesquieu has 3 syllables, just like separate has 3 syllables, okay? So Montesquieu, separate, three branches of government. That's what you need to remember about Montesquieu, okay? All right, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he was a Swiss man who truly believed that people are essentially good and that it is society and civilization that has corrupted people's natural goodness. He wrote The Social Contract, and his big belief was that the government is a contract between the leaders and the people, that the people are free to create a government that is guided by the general will of society. This is also known as a direct democracy. Of course, if you'll remember from the beginning of this topic, not everyone is going to agree with these enlightened ideas. So, of course, the people who have issues with this are going to be the noble class, the monarchs. They don't agree with this whole idea of direct democracy, and they're in a social contract between them and the common people of the land. That's just not going to do it for them. So here is your memory trick for Rousseau. Rousseau's contract made some people happy. Not everybody. Of course, it's going to make the common people happy, but not everybody is going to be happy about this idea of common people having a say in the government and things being run that way. All right, this leads us up to Voltaire. Voltaire, which is his pen name, his given name was Francois-Marie Auré. He wrote more than 70 books and essays. He's known for Philosophical Letters, which was a satire in which he used sarcasm, irony, and ridicule against his opponents. Now, the people that he often targeted were people like the noble class, the clergy, the aristocrats, and the government. He had lots of people who did not like him so much because he was so critical and so outspoken against these different groups of people that he felt led to the corruption that was going on in their society. So his big belief was that there should be separation of church and state, and that there should be freedom of religion, speech, and thought. So while he ridiculed much of the corruption that was going on in the church, he was a very big supporter of religious tolerance, both freedom of religion and freedom from religion, meaning that no one should be forced to believe something that they simply don't believe. I love this quote from Voltaire. Here's what he said. He said, "I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it." Okay, so he says, hey, look, I don't have to agree with what it is you say or what you even believe, but I do believe that you have the right to express your thoughts and your opinions. Okay, so that's a big thing for him. All right, so here's your memory trick for Voltaire. Voltaire was very tolerant of all religions. So again, capitalize and underline both of those V's in that sentence so that you can remember that, make that connection. Okay, this leads us to our last one, Mary Wollstonecraft. Okay, she wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women, and her big belief was that equal rights must include women. She disagreed with Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who we talked about a minute ago, and he thought that a woman's education should be second to that of a man's. Wollstonecraft wrote that women needed to be educated in order to be virtuous and useful. And so she highly encouraged women to enter into male-dominated fields like medicine and politics. She definitely supported equal rights between men and women. So your memory trick for Mary Wollstonecraft is that she is the only woman in this whole list of Philosophes that we have talked about today. Okay? All right, so that wraps up today's video on the Philosophes, big Enlightenment thinkers of this whole Age of Reason time period. So where we're going next, we've got some revolutions coming. We've had all these new ideas. They're out there. They're spreading. The common people are going to start to latch onto them and support them. And so now we've got revolutions that are coming. And we'll talk about that next class. We're going to look at the political and cultural effects of this whole Age of Reason, Age of Enlightenment. See you then.